So in this video, we're going to look at creating something I call the Donk bass. It's a percussive bass sound that relies on a couple instances of operator and an instance of analog to create a nice big sounding tone where the FM is simulating a filter sweep. I'll just let you hear it here. Got some nice dub delay on there as well, and I'll let you hear the whole thing in conjunction with the beat that I made. So it's a really cool tone, and it has a nice warehouse party feel to it. It's got a lot going on in the FM department and shows off a couple really cool features that you can use when you work it with FM synthesizers. So to make our Donk bass, even though most of the programming is actually going to be done in operator, we're going to be layering it over top of an instance of analog. So I'm going to start off by creating the analog tone here. And I'm just going to quickly adjust the envelope settings here with full sustain. I'm going to pull the release down. We'll be adding some release later on, but I'm going to pull it down to start with. I'm going to switch it over to monophonic. I'm going to turn on filter 1, and I'm going to put both oscillators through filter 1 and drop oscillator 1 down an octave. So let's just have a listen to what that sounds like. Okay, so I'm going to want to take the filter and roll it down a fair amount. Operator is going to be providing a buzzy top end here. I'm going to switch that over to an LP24 filter. So let's have a listen again. Okay, that'll do to start with. So I'm just going to add a little bit of drive in the filter section here. I'm going to choose the symmetrical 1. And that sounds good. So I'm just going to quickly put this into an instrument rack, which I'm going to quickly rename Donk bass. And analog is going to get renamed as sub. And now I'm going to start processing analog a little bit with some audio effects. So to start with, I'm going to add the a bit warmer preset after analog here. And I'm just going to adjust a couple settings on it. I'm going to give it a little bit more drive and pull back on the wet dry a little bit. Let's hear how that sounds. Okay, that's providing a little bit more signal here. So I'm just going to minimize that. And just to start with here, I'm going to add a utility at the end of everything, just so that we can effectively gain stage here. I'm also going to put a utility at the end of analog's chain. And I'm going to pull its width in slightly, about 70% there. And now I'm going to do a couple things within analog's chain just to get a little bit more top-end fuzz in analog signal. And to start with, I'm going to take an instance of erosion. I'm going to put it after the a bit warmer preset. And I'm going to convert it into an audio effect rack so that we can again use a bypass channel. So I'm just going to rename this erosion. Rename the whole rack erosion, and I'm going to create an extra chain, which is just going to be our bypass. So within erosion settings here, I'm just going to be looking for something that adds a little bit of interesting harmonic content over top of analog's output. So we're going to be listening to both of these in conjunction, and I'm just going to dial up a couple settings here, and we'll find a sweet spot. I like how that sounds. So we're going to do a couple quick things to erosion as well here. We're going to put an auto filter after the instance of erosion, which I'm going to use just to high pass the output. I'm going to put a saturator beforehand, and I'm going to go for our digital clip, and that's going to go right before the auto filter. And we're going to just play with a couple settings here. Cutoff down a little bit. Bring a bit of resonance in. Cool. That's going to do for those three. And I'm just going to add a simple delay after the auto filter, I'm going to put it in time mode and do 1 and 1.5 millisecond delays. And roll it down a little. Okay, that sounds good. So now I'm also going to take the erosion level and just bring it down a little bit relative to the bypass. Okay, so to start with, that's going to do it for analog. That's just going to provide a nice gritty subtone, which we're going to be able to layer operator over top of. So let's just play that up and down the keyboard a couple times here. And you can really hear erosion and that high pass filter allowing for some extra grit and distortion on that tone without really affecting the low end, which is what we're after here. So now we're going to add an instance of operator in, and we're actually going to create one tone with an operator and then double it up afterwards. So I'm going to want those operator tones to actually exist within their own instrument rack because I'm going to process them together. So I'm just going to quickly group those together into a rack, and I'm going to rename that rack Donk tone. And I'm going to rename that first instance of operator Donk 1. So now we can start playing around with this. I'm going to solo it so we can hear exactly what we're working with. And I'm going to choose a different algorithm. I don't want this serial series algorithm. I want to use this one. So when we choose this operator chain, we have operator A as our overall carrier. We have operator B affecting A, and we have operator C affecting B. Operator D has a direct effect on A and is not a carrier for another operator's signal. So I'm also going to switch it over to one voice here, and we're just going to have a listen to this initialization patch here. Okay, so that's a very basic sine wave. I'm going to switch it up so that we have something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go for the sine 8-bit, which just adds a little bit of harmonic overtone here. And now I'm going to start adding a little bit of signal from operator D, just so that operator A, the carrier, has a slightly more interesting tone. I'm just going to bring it up in the mix a little bit. I'm going to move it up the harmonic scale a little. And that's going to do for our initial operator setup. So I'm now going to go over and I'm going to adjust the envelope on operator A. Since this donk sound is going to trigger with every note, but I don't want it to sustain over the course of the note, I want it to just be like a pluck. I'm going to take the envelope and I'm going to reduce it down. And we're just going to have a listen and find the decay that we want here. Okay, so let's start with that. So now comes the interesting stuff. We're going to add some FM from operator B to operator A. I'm going to bring the level up a fair amount. I'm going to move it up the scale a fair amount. And as you can hear, our tone has become much brighter, but we've lost some body. Now, what that's going to do when we adjust the envelope here is create the impression of a filter shutting, because we're going to have our FM from operator B jump up to the full amount and then decay down. So let's find a sweet spot for this. And now we're going to have a look at operator C, and we're going to do something similar with operator C. Remember, C is affecting B. So I'm going to bring C's signal up in the mix, and I'm going to move it even further up the scale. Let's have a listen now. Right on. So that's making the tone much, much brighter. And what I want to do with C is give it a much shorter decay so that C's influence on B decays very, very quickly, faster than B's influence on A, and that's going to give an even more pronounced shutting sound. Okay, that sounds cool. So I'm just going to flip back, and we're going to have a listen to that donk sound in conjunction with the sub. Okay, I'm going to bring the erosion layer down in the mix a little bit more. So I'm going to have a listen to that in conjunction with the beat here, just so we can hear the interplay. I do want to quickly chuck a MIDI effect in before my operator rack here and just bump operator's signal down an octave so that both instances of operator, when they exist in this rack, will be playing an octave lower than the input. Let's have a listen again. And we're just going to solo this again, and I'm going to start playing with a couple envelope settings just so we get a little bit more of a open and shut feel. Next up, we're going to take this instance of operator and we're going to duplicate it. And I'm going to put a MIDI pitch plugin before that instance of operator, and I'm going to tune it up 7 semitones. And this is going to give us a nice chorded feel. And the second donk, I'm just going to rename donk 2. And I'm going to bring it down in the mix slightly. Cool. So now I'm going to take the output of our operator rack and I'm going to start processing it a little bit. So to start with our operator processing, I'm going to pull in an instance of EQ8, which I'm going to use to shave out the lows here. And let's listen to those together again. I'm just going to roll down the cutoff and analog slightly here. And back to operator here. Behind the EQ8, I'm going to add an instance of Corpus. Corpus is really good for bringing out plucky sounds. I'm going to use the bright snare preset, but this is probably going to be a little bit too much. This is a fairly intense preset here. So I'm going to play with the wet dry until I find a balance that I like. Let's listen to that alone. So after Corpus, I'm going to bring in another saturator, which I'm going to use just to, again, warm up the signal a little bit. We'll roll the donk tone down a little. So now we're going to add a couple spatial effects to the output of the donk tone here. I'm going to start off with our simple delay used for widening. So very short delay times here. Okay, that sounded good. So next up, we're going to add reverb. And we're going to do our trick again where we're going to use a sidechain compressor to duck the reverb out of the way when the tone is sounding. So I'm going to put that into an effect rack, which I'm going to expand, just call verb. And I'm going to create a bypass chain again. And in the verb chain, I'm going to put the reverb over to 100% wet because the bypass is going to be providing the dry signal. I don't need any dry signal from this reverb. And I'm going to lower it in the mix a little bit. I'm going to pull in the pre-delay and pull in the delay time a little bit. I'm also going to activate the low cut. And then right after that reverb, I'm going to put in a compressor. I'm going to activate a sidechain mode and take my audio input not from Donk Bass's overall signal, but from the donk tone pre-effects. So it's just going to be operator's output that's going to affect the sidechain compressor here. Analog's output will not affect it. So that means when I bring the threshold down and I sound a note, we now get a nice slap whenever the key is released. And that's that reverb jumping up in the mix. So let's have a listen to that bass line again. Excellent. So let's have a listen to the bass and the beat together. So I feel like we can get a little bit more rhythm coming from this bass line. And to do that, I am actually going to add an instance of my dub station here. I'm going to put that in after the donk tone. I'm going to roll down its wet dry a fair amount. And remember, the donk tone is providing some mid body. It's not providing much in the way of low end, so I'm not too worried about adding a repeating spatial effect to this bass line, as analog signal itself is not going to pass through this delay. So let's just play around with that until we find a nice dubby repeating tone that we like. Okay, that sounded cool. So I'm also going to take dub station and I'm going to put it into an audio effect rack as well, because I'm going to create a bypass again. And rename that dub. And then on the output of dub station, I'm going to use an auto pan. And I'm actually, this time, going to use it for panning, believe it or not. And I'm just going to use that auto pan to pan the delay coming out from dub station left and right. I'm just going to quickly make sure that I've got dub station's output 100% to wet now. Pull it down in the mix. And we're going to play around with the auto pan and with dub station to get a nice swimmy feel here. Going to quickly go back and we're going to try putting our donk 2 up an octave instead of up 7 semitones here, and we'll just see how that sounds. So I actually prefer that up an octave. We're not getting quite the same chord feel, but we are getting some extra layering of a higher harmonic version of that same tone over top. So I'm just going to flip back to analog here, and I'm going to add a bit of release to analog's output. And let's have a listen now. So that's sounding great for our bass tone. One thing I want to do now, though, is I want to take the entire output of this instrument rack and put it through a compressor, which I'm going to sidechain to the jack beat. I'm going to activate the EQ on the sidechain. That way I can sweep it low so that we're just taking the signal coming essentially from the kick drum as our incoming trigger for this sidechain compressor. And I'm just going to start this playing, and we're going to play around with the threshold and the ratio so that we get a nice sidechain feel. That sounded cool. So you can really hear how within this donk tone here, which I'll just solo, we get a nice metallic thwack that's coming from a couple different FM interactions. The operators and their envelopes are causing quite a bit of FM content to occur at the start of that hit. It fades away very, very quickly. So overall, operator's output is relatively short. It's just adding a little bit of a pluck to the start of the bass tone overall. The bass tone, again, sounds like this. Got a nice metallic, bizarro repeating tone coming from our dub delay at the end there. And again, in context with the beat, it has a nice pumping sidechainy feel. So let's have a listen to that. Excellent. And that is how you can use analog and operator together to create a sibilant, plucky, donkey tone. The FM in operator is being used really just to accent the start of the bass hit, and analog is providing the body underneath, which is a very, very good combination. It allows for some very round tones to be created that still have a lot going on, but which are very stable in the mix because analog signal is really the dominant signal. So we don't have much in the way going on with analog's EQ. There's no points where analog's output is going to be getting overpowered or ducked or anything like that, except when we're choosing to do it with the sidechain compressor. And the sidechain compressor is just causing our entire bass line to pump up and down in the mix. We've also got some sidechaining going on with the reverb there so that we get a nice little pulse as the donk sound ends. And that's one of the ways in which you can use FM to create percussive bass sounds.